Hello there, it's Tom Jordan. I hope you had a very Merry Christmas. And to my Jewish friends, if you're celebrating Hanukkah, the second night of Hanukkah tonight, Happy Hanukkah to you as well. All right, so it is the day after Christmas, and sometimes after a holiday, you go back to work and reality hits you smack dab right in the face a bit, doesn't it, right? It's okay, you keep the Christ in Christmas close, don't lose sight of priorities in life. But it makes things easier to do that if you do that as you're bearing through the realities of what's happening in the media and whatnot. So, one thing we spoke about this year, here in the first few months of Tom Jordan Live, is the issue of being allowed to speak your mind in this country, what you believe to be the truth of the matter. And there is an effort underway. As you know, even after the election, the stomp of those who like to rid this country of speech that they disagree with, they would like to keep it going in that direction. And we hear it from some journalists, so called, from politicians, from some people in our justice system. Michigan Secretary of State is another example. You can go down the list. It's primarily people on the political left who, based on these claims of disinformation, they seem, in my view at least, clearly do not like the entirety of the U.S. Constitution, particularly the First Amendment. Second Amendment, they don't like either, but let's talk about the First Amendment in there and the protection of individual rights if those rights infringe upon their ability to hold on to their power. We're talking about the freedom of speech. And I want to play you an interview we did earlier with Khalil Habib. He's a constitutional expert and how he says the best way to fight disinformation, as they call it, otherwise known as lies, is with more speech, not less. So I'm going to get into that in just a moment here on this edition of Tom Jordan Live. That's just a few seconds away. I want to remind you to chime in. You can comment, ask me some questions, or just, lay out your case for whatever your side of this issue you're on. And I want to play those for you. I want to read them actually for you. In the comments section, if you leave it right there, I'll get to those in just a moment. Also, the best way that you can help Tom Jordan Live is simply to subscribe, click the notification bell, of course, and share the content, share our videos. That helps us out tremendously. So thank you for that very much. Okay, so after Donald Trump's recent election win, certain leftist groups, they have taken the defeat as a reason to clamp down even harder on free speech, rather than, reassessing their own policies or their own spreading of demonstrable disinformation, as they call it. Their own, maybe in some cases, they're flat out lies, or maybe they're just naive or they don't understand the truth. I'll give them that benefit of the doubt. Either way, they want to control the narratives to prevent, they say, similar electoral outcomes in the future. Like, we don't want another Donald Trump to win, so we need to crack down on free speech. So the base question then becomes, how do we discover what's true when these efforts are underway? And who's the arbiter of truth anyway? What's false? Do we do that by minimizing speech, or do we do it by maximizing speech? The founders of this country knew the answer to that. It was clear as day to them, and we should know the answer to that also. And I got into that and why the First Amendment should never be done away with my conversation earlier with a professor at Hillsdale College. Okay, let's bring in Khalil Habib. He's the Associate Professor of Politics, Allison and Dorothy Rouse Professor in Politics at Hillsdale College. It is so nice to have you. I really appreciate your time because this is, as you know, a very, very and incredibly important topic.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. I wouldn't miss it.
Yeah, thank you. So this election, I think it showed a lot of things, as I think it did in 2020. But there was a real effort, to silence certain speech out there. 2020, we saw it now in 2024, and calling it, disinformation, this guise, this kind of ruse, if you want to call it that. That information over there is disinformation, so we need to shut it down. So I guess I'll start off with this before we get real deep into it. But is that a reason enough to censor somebody? Like, if you determine that's what someone's opinion is wrong, is that enough to actually silence and censor that speech?
No, absolutely not. In fact, the only way you can actually combat disinformation is allowing a complete freedom of speech, people to actually push back on claims. To silence them is more propaganda, and it's an infringement on our right to free speech. But the only way to combat disinformation, misinformation, however you want to spin it is to actually maximize the amount of free speech possible, not limit it.
It's the exact opposite, and that's the whole. I
Mhm.
mean, if you want to find, the foundation of this government is that argumentation was very instrumental in framing even the Constitution. You had to argue, go back and forth, different opinions, and hopefully get to some realm of truth in the end of all of that. And I completely agree with that. And I think this is important too because we have to define, who really is the arbiter of what is true, because you can easily make the argument, but the ones that are claiming the other side is filled with disinformation in their own right have had their own, years of demonstrable disinformation that they've spouted through the media as well, right? So who is the arbiter of what's true?
Well, obviously, the political parties become the arbiter, and historically, and at least most recently, it's been the Democratic Party has been the arbiter. And now, when Elon took over Twitter, he had to fire people who are even in the intelligence agencies who are in there. So it's either you have free speech or you don't. But you brought up a really good point, actually, in your last remark. You opened by saying that it's completely contrary to the form of government that we have. That's true. I mean, that kind of censorship completely undermines the principles of the American founding. In Federalist 9 and 10, for example, the Federalists wanted to ensure that there was no censorship. There wasn't an effort to, in the interest even of having peace in the country, to give everybody the same opinion, whether it's through political correctness or limiting what they can hear and what they can say. They literally say the only way you can actually control the effects of factions and free speech that could lead to any kind of conflict is to just open it up as much as possible and not limit free speech. So it's contrary completely to the American founding to even want to consider restricting speech, especially around elections. I mean, people are making decisions that are necessary for our national security, people's personal well-being. There's too much at stake, and that's exactly why the powers that be want to have it censored.
Okay, well, to that point, because, in the state of Michigan, for example, there is a Secretary of State. You mentioned elections. She's kind of the overseer of the elections in the state. And there are some people who say, hey, I witnessed some fraud here. I witnessed this, or I think this happened instead of that. And she, along with the Attorney General in Michigan, along with the governor, and a lot of people within that party are saying that's disinformation, that is dangerous. We need to isolate that information, identify who's spouting that disinformation, take photos of that person, and turn it into my office. I mean, that's how crazy it's become. And I actually had a conversation the other day with even a member of the opposite party who said, well, there are certain things that you really do have to censor because it becomes dangerous. Like you can't yell fire in a theater. And that's often used as a reason to silence certain speech that might be perceived as, quote unquote, dangerous to
Mm-hmm.
democracy. Is that in any realm of, I guess, when you frame it within the Constitution, is that in any sense a valid argument that there are certain things that might shut down democracy that we need to shut them up? And if it involves elections specifically, that's something that we could deem as maybe civilly or even criminally punishable by law.
I am not aware of any restrictions on speech that would undermine democracy. Democracy literally means the ability to speak and that everybody has an equal say and voice. Now, the reason why you can't yell fire, for example, in a theater is because obviously if it's untrue, you're putting people's physical lives in immediate danger. And of course, there are restrictions on, for example, speech related to espionage or treason. You can't hide behind free speech and say, well, I was just passing information to China or whomever as exercising my free speech. So those obviously have some direct impact, but the ability to challenge an election, the ability to hold elected officials accountable, that is perfectly permitted. And in fact, somebody who had no dog in the fight whatsoever, Alexis de Tocqueville, a great French political philosopher, visited the United States at the time of Andrew Jackson's presidency. And he said one of the great advantages that America has over France, where he came from, is that the media and the citizens can put together associations and newspapers. Today, he would say podcasts and radio, and they can go after elected officials as much as they can, and sometimes even misinformation. And Tocqueville said, even though that might happen, it's still better than any kind of censorship because what other ways do you have to hold elected officials accountable, if not the ability to call into question what they do, challenge some of their policies, or at least articulate what you think one should consider as a representative. So there's just, no matter where you look at, whether you look at the American founding or from statesmen abroad who visited the country, there are more arguments in favor of freedom of speech than there are restrictions. Usually it's those who can't win in a
Hmm.
transparent policy that want that kind of restriction. Democrats have historically never been completely honest about what their policies are. Trump, whether you like him or not, has been very blunt, almost to a fault. And so you have to think about, why is it that you want to restrict things? People have gotten used to managing a narrative and manufacturing public opinion. So things like Twitter and social media have become, quote, dangerous in their minds. And even Hillary Clinton said that if we don't censor, we lose control of the narrative. Well, what does that tell you? That's in the interest of those running for office and maintaining power. It's not in the interest of the citizens who have a God given right for freedom of speech.
Right, and I know I'm very familiar with that statement from Hillary Clinton and other Democrats. This is the party
Mm-hmm.
that wants to censor speech, and she
Mm-hmm.
said that basically she needs to do a better job, and the Democratic Party needs to do a
Mm-hmm.
better job of collusion and colluding with the news media out there to make sure they have the proper narrative. And I can,
Exactly.
look back. It's not like distant memory; it's very recent history where there have been a number of narratives that have been propagated by the Democratic Party that were demonstrably false, but the media went along with them. And we could just name a few. There was the Hunter Biden laptop, and that was somehow Russian disinformation. There was the whole, Russia Donald Trump collusion hoax. Members of the news media saying that the president, Donald Trump, was an asset of Russia. He was a spy committing espionage. None of that was true. There wasn't evidence to support it. And those kinds of things continued even through this recent election, where Kamala Harris was not transparent. She wouldn't answer questions, and the media seemed lockstep with her.
Mm-hmm.
What does that spell to you in terms of, okay, if even the media is not doing what, the Frenchman who came over and observed how great that
Mm-hmm.
was, that we have a free press, they're no longer doing that. Where are we now when we speak of freedom of speech, if even the watchdogs are now in on it, so to speak?
Yeah, that's a great observation. I mean, there's a very important number that came up in the recent election, and that is, uh, many demographics had realigned in this election and voted for Trump. The one that I found quite interesting was the ages between 18 and 29. Historically, have always, in other words, sort of college town, young, have always historically broken in majorities with the Democratic candidate. This time around, that wasn't the case. Trump closed the distance and gap in many of those areas, and in some places, even won them outright. And I asked and I've polled many, many people across the country within that age demographic, why do you think this happened? And they said, well, because we get our information from Twitter, from social media. And when they look at no one watches the legacy media. The legacy media is fighting a current war using last war's munitions, and they're just out of date. They haven't realized that no one's paying attention to them anymore. In fact, even Chris Wallace has recently declared that he's leaving mainstream media and he's going to open up a podcast. I think what has happened is something that is extremely healthy for the country. It's the social media, the Twitter phenomenon, the YouTube, whatever else, shows like yours and others. They've defragmented the monopoly that legacy medias have had, which literally became instruments of political parties of both the left and the right, depending on which channel. No one, they're not relevant anymore, except with an older generation. But the younger generation, nobody listens to them. Everybody was aware that everything was contrived with Kamala. Ages ago, nobody would have been aware, because you have now social media where people can get immediate feedback and immediate information, some of it misinformation, some of it not. But at least it's too big and quick to control. So I think what's great about that is that the parties moving forward are going to have to realize there's very few places that they can hide and manufacture their policies. They have to be transparent. Those who love the legacy media and the manufacturing almost like of a Hollywood set delivery of their policies are afraid to run on what they really want. So, for example, Kamala would run certain ads in Michigan about the Middle East, and then other ads in New York that would say the complete opposite. You can't do
Mm.
that anymore. You're literally watching somebody fighting a new war that they've never seen before with old weapons. It's not going to work, and it's going to set them back. And the election results prove it.
Yeah, you're 100% right. The election results do prove this because there
Mm-hmm.
is an impact through social media that I am now grateful exists because I've seen in my own personal career what has happened in legacy,
Hmm.
type of
Hmm.
media outlets, which I had to leave for that very same reason. They were controlling
Hmm.
what we were allowed as reporters to do. We could not
Hmm.
cover certain issues any longer
Hmm.
because it
Hmm.
didn't fit the narrative. These are newsrooms around the entirety of the country here that are
Hmm.
now engaged in this. And thankfully, the technology is to the point now where we can have these open dialogues. We can question those in power like we're supposed to do, like they did, a couple hundred years ago. To that
Hmm.
point, social media and now Twitter or X, after he was purchased by this guy, Elon Musk, you might have heard of him. There's a
Hmm.
lot of pushback against him. And there's these reports out, there's groups like the Center for Countering Digital Hate. They do now have strategies in place to kill Musk's X because Musk and X and Twitter, whatever you want to call it, they are no longer censoring conservative speech like the other social media platforms have been for quite some time, YouTube and some of these other places that are actively doing that kind of things. So, how far do you think these groups, whatever the ruse is, whatever their guise, the guise of hate speech, we need to silence it because conservatives are filled with hate, which thankfully, again, to your point, most people are realizing that's not exactly true. But
Hmm.
but that being said, how far do you think they're willing to go to shut down Twitter and any platform like this one, even in order to censor and silence those who disagree with the mainstream narrative?
Never underestimate the length, the extent to which any of these power players want to maintain control. If it means shutting you down and they get to live another year, they'll do it. I don't put anything past them. Elon's an interesting phenomenon because he was asked the very same question actually a couple of years ago when he first bought it, and somebody asked him what would happen if the powers that be swarm around you, destroy advertising, bring it down, and he said, "Well, this time." The whole world will know. And I thought that was interesting. One of the things
Hmm.
that Elon did that was crucial in this election is any shenanigans that were going on, he was able to echo it across the world. And now his app is number one all over the planet, which is astonishing. It wasn't before. Because mostly it was used for color revolutions and propaganda, and he finally defragmented it. So let me give you an example. When that terrible storm came and hit the South, no one, I didn't know that there were efforts to prevent him from bringing Starlink down there,
Hmm.
and efforts to keep Trump and others from helping. The only reason people knew that was because of X. And at this point, the cat's out of the bag. It's too big to bring down. And at this point, if they were to attempt to do that, their tyranny would show. It would become so obvious. He was trying to do good. And you can say, well, he was doing it because it's an election. Who cares? The fact of the matter is, he was there to do something and offer a service, and there were efforts to prevent him from doing that. Now the whole world knows. Here I am in Michigan, and I found out about it, and I would not have found out about it if there wasn't an alternative to these media outlets. So I think they're, of course, for that reason, precisely because he's so effective, he's literally stripping them of whatever manufacturing tools they had for public opinion right before our very eyes. The other thing is, I don't think you can underestimate how much Trump is also responsible for destroying legacy media. On the one hand, they're responsible because they just overplayed their hand. But as he was attacking them constantly as fake news, people started paying attention. And then when they would weigh what they would see with their own eyes on one channel with what the unedited looked like, it became pretty clear that he was actually right, that they were as he said, the enemies of the people. Now, whether he intuited that or not, the fact of the matter is the American founders saw anyone who infringing on freedom of speech as enemies of the people. Alexis de Tocqueville saw anyone who infringed on freedom of speech as enemies of the people.
Hmm.
Political power gets extremely dangerous if it is concentrated. And the only tools we have as citizens is the ability to speak openly, to connect, to form friendships, associations, and without any restriction on our ability to push back against power, to challenge and to articulate. That's exactly why there's a drive by those who are frankly losing the American mind, why they want to censor. They could not remain in power if they couldn't manufacture a vision of what they want, and the people have voted against it. Elon's too big. I think there's no going back.
Yeah, and Elon wasn't Donald Trump. He was a different animal. He came out of more of a liberal mindset, and even he was
Correct.
seeing in real time what was happening. And I do give he and I give Donald Trump a lot of credit because back in 2016, he was calling out the media as being fake. And me at that time working in the legacy media news outlets, I would watch and pay attention. I'd be a part of these 1 hour, 2 hour press conferences, and I would see the entirety of what was being said. And then I would see how our newsrooms were covering it, and it was fake. It wasn't
Hmm.
true. It's not what was
Hmm.
said, and it wasn't
Hmm.
exact. It wasn't what happened either. So Donald Trump
Hmm.
at that time got a lot of pushback saying, "Oh, he's going after journalists, the arbiters of truth and the protectors of democracy." No, they're going. He's going after them because you're exactly the opposite of what you're pretending to be. And so
Hmm.
I'm very grateful for that. And he stood his ground against severe opposition.
Hmm.
That might be what it takes, right? You got to
Hmm.
stand your ground, see it all the way through because eventually the truth rises to the surface, right? So,
Hmm.
how would you recommend people do that? I mean, you look back to the founders, they stood their
Hmm.
ground and there was
Hmm.
tremendous sacrifice in order to allow these freedoms to exist
Hmm.
in for this great country. How would you recommend, getting that spine of steel, your face like flint, nothing's going to move
Hmm.
you uh, to
How?
get to the
What is
truth?
what was the question? How to what now?
How do you recommend, what was it about the founders that gave them this
I see.
spine of steel to make
Got it.
sure that regardless of the opposition, they were not going to be moved?
Yeah, that's a great question. They were steeped in the Bible, the philosophies of John Locke and Montesquieu. And if you look at the early American founding, those were the three main resources that they would often cite when they were debating the country and its institutions. For John Locke and for the Bible, we have these God given natural rights, and among them is the ability to articulate what our views are and to debate. It's a Western tradition to consider ourselves as collaborators in a political project. So the whole purpose of government, according to Locke, is not just to simply protect your life and your liberty, but to also protect your ability to speak. How else in a representative government can you possibly represent the consent of the governed if they're not allowed to push back and to articulate and to speak? I mean, it's just literally woven into the fabric of the country. And the founders in Federalist 9, again, any one of your viewers who wants to take a look, it's Federalist Papers 9 and 10. They weighed the possibility, should we just limit speech in an effort to just make people get along and not
Hmm.
have strife and conflict? Should we just give everybody the same opinions, i.e., introduce something like what we would today call political correctness? And they resoundingly said, absolutely not. The only option is to have a large confederated republic like ours that would allow maximum freedom of speech. There was no other way to deal with debate in politics than and to hold again elected officials accountable. You see it even in the tradition of the early Renaissance. Machiavelli in his discourses says that there should be no restrictions even on making accusations against public officials. Not slander, that's different. If
Yep.
it can be proven in a court of law and you have evidence of any kind of malfeasance, there's no other way to literally check those who enter power in powerful positions and are ostensibly representing the consent of the governed. So the founders were steeped in that tradition, from John Adams to of the Federalists, even the Anti-Federalists. Nobody was in favor of restrictions of speech, especially after they had fought the American Revolution. They didn't think that the purpose of government was to limit it; it was to give it complete open space. That's why they also adopted Roman names. It was a throwback to the era when the Romans would deliberate openly and publicly and without fear. It is very American to embrace that kind of freedom of speech, and it's frankly completely un American to restrict it.
It's a shame how popular it is now to try to silence quote unquote disinformation to the point where
Mm-hmm.
now our elected leaders are publicly stating that is the right thing to do to counter hate and whatnot.
Mm-hmm.
One final
Mm-hmm.
question, I'll let you go. When you
Sure.
talk about, the United States right now, what's happening in this country and our culture is not unique in the effort to silence speech. There's a lot of international efforts to do this. A lot of foreign entities. You mentioned Elon Musk's X is doing quite well overseas. And
Mm-hmm.
I think back to the
Mm-hmm.
Arab Spring when people were starting to realize, oh wait, there's social media here, and these countries that were silencing individuals couldn't do it because they had Twitter back then, and these social
Mm-hmm.
media. It's
Mm-hmm.
very freeing to a lot of people, but there is a strong concerted effort internationally to shut down Elon Musk and conservative networks or voices in that regard. How entrenched do you think this current iteration of the U.S. government is in those international efforts?
Well, I don't know about that, but I don't know an accurate answer to that. All I know is the reason why it's global is that for centuries, since frankly after the World War II, governments have gotten too big, too powerful, and they've started to control what their constituents hear and see. What Trump did is he made it possible for people around the world to see that there can be a populist movement that can reclaim the governments that were ostensibly there to serve them. That's why he was such a world phenomenon and why many countries wanted to try to stamp out Elon. But again, he's too big. Every time you do that, no matter what country you're in now, it looks like an obvious play to restrict freedom. Why would you do that? If you were governing in the interest of your citizens, wouldn't you want to be as transparent as possible? Look what Elon is doing now. He's now apparently head of the Department of Efficiency or whatever it's called. And he
Yes.
said they're going to post everything that they're going to consider online, everything, so that there's be total transparency. Well, if you believe in what you're doing, you want to be proud of it, you should be open about it. Why have anything even closed door like that? And it's too late. It's over. People now are aware because of social media and the internet that for a long time they have been kept in the dark. They're not going back. Once you have a whiff of freedom, you're not going to put the yoke of tyranny on yourself again. And so all over the world, you can see that people are craving to find real information. And people aren't stupid. Most people can tell disinformation from misinformation. And when you open up freedom of speech entirely, there's ways to check against that. You just let the free market of ideas shake that all out. How much is the U.S. government involved in anything like that over abroad? I don't know, but all I know is that they weren't able to pull it off here, and I think globally people are seeing what can be done
Hmm.
with respect to overzealous politicians, and it's always the answer is always freedom, just like our founders had argued.
Yeah, got to hold them accountable. And by the way, I wouldn't have known that FEMA had prevented aid going to Donald Trump supporters during the
Hmm.
hurricane in North Carolina
Hmm.
if it wasn't
Hmm.
for social media, because the news
Hmm.
outlets were not covering it. They were
Hmm.
they were legitimately ignoring houses with Donald Trump signs in the yards. Don't give them
Hmm.
aid after this hurricane.
Hmm.
Give it to the others as well. That is absolutely
Hmm.
wrong. So again, the importance of honesty and transparency, and nowadays alternative media sources, unlike the legacy media outlets. So I appreciate your time. I'm really grateful for what you're fighting
Likewise.
for, and you're
Thank you
you're a
very
great
much.
voice there at Hillsdale College. Khalil Habib is the associate professor of politics. Allison and Dorothy Rouse, professor in politics. Khalil, so nice to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time. Appreciate it.
Likewise. I hope we do it again. Thank you. Have a good day.
You too.
Take
Thanks so
care.
much. Yeah, my conversation with Khalil Habib, and we would like to have him back. Anyway, it's a great warning, and it's a great explanation of why there is free speech and the importance of it to help you and I come to some semblance of truth about what really is going on. And that was kind of the architect. I mean, the reason the founders created the system we have today. It's not perfect, of course not. But it's a lot better, as he said, than silencing a whole group of people in order to get your way across. That doesn't lead to truth. That leads to oppression and falsehoods being allowed to perpetuate throughout society. And I am disturbed, I'll be honest with you, but by the way some on the left have reacted to Donald Trump's win over Kamala Harris, like seeing it as proof somehow that Americans are either misinformed or intolerant, rather than facing the reality that people rejected these extreme policies. And I think it's a refusal to self-reflect for the media in particular to even consider that maybe their message is out of sync with the majority of Americans. And it's a dangerous precedent that will fuel more division in this country. It's not going to help, and it sows distrust across the political spectrum. If you keep calling for transparency, but your actions show that you want to be as far from transparency as humanly possible, in order to hide things time and again, then people are seeing right through it. I mean, look at 2020, even Joe Biden's campaign. He didn't campaign in 2020. And the excuse back then, well, it was COVID because it's too dangerous for him to go out and campaign. Unlike Donald Trump, who was very, very, you don't have to like Donald Trump, but he is, as Khalil Habib said, very open about what he believes in and what he stands for. He doesn't shy away from the truth and how he views something, but Joe Biden does. And then we saw it this time around with Kamala Harris. She refused to answer questions, and she thought she had I don't know who was consulting her, in what they thought maybe was an ingenious way to maneuver around the media, to say the exact same things, which was nothing to specific questions that they were asked upon. And it was very silly. It was like, do you not understand what I'm asking you? Because the answer is completely irrelevant and very vague in general. It doesn't work, and she lost the election as a result of it. The argument that misinformation is what led to Trump's win is an excuse to undermine free speech. It wasn't misinformation that led to Donald Trump's win. It was misinformation, I would argue, that led to Joe Biden's win in 2020, because they silenced a big chunk of the American populace. The media wouldn't take their side. They wouldn't give them a voice. And by claiming, this time around that alternative media is to blame for Donald Trump's win, well, maybe in their view, because they were actually exposing what was really happening in many cases behind the scenes. The things I just mentioned, FEMA refusing. People within FEMA, I'm not saying the organization had a policy. I'm saying the people that worked in FEMA would see Donald Trump signs in the yards of hurricane victims, and they would exclude them from receiving aid, disaster relief, based on the fact that they supported Donald Trump. Okay, so the media didn't cover that at large, the legacy media outlet. Twitter did, or X, or these podcasts like this would, because they saw it happening and they reported on it like the media used to do. So that's what we're talking about. That's the misinformation out there, or the disinformation, purposely omitting facts that make the Democratic Party look bad, that puts them in a disfavorable light. That's collusion by the media. And there was somebody on, I think it was Claire Danes, was on Stephen Colbert, and she started talking about how they would have these, weekly or monthly meetings with members of the CIA, Hollywood, and the media. And they said, yeah, the CIA wanted to partner with the media, journalists, and us in order to skew the narrative. And then Stephen Colbert cuts her off right away and changes the subject. It was amazing that was, half admitted before it was cut off. Anyway, so certain factions on the left, they're laying the groundwork for a more coordinated attack on any source that does not align with their views. So watch out for that, because it's not over, this attempt to silence you as an American citizen. It's not over just because Donald Trump won. It's going to be a fight, and it's going to be a battle, and it's going to be a battle royale. It's going to be very difficult. Calling for stricter controls over what they call misinformation. There's an effort right now to do that absolutely. I mean, you can scour certain websites and news outlets that are not ABC or CNN or MSNBC or CBS that are talking about plans underway. Even Bill Gates, he's coming out now, and he's saying that we need to use AI, artificial intelligence, to censor people who don't buy the public narrative about vaccines, because they are promoting violence, is the way he phrased it. Bill Gates, one of the richest men in the world, has developed his company's own AI systems, and now they want to use artificial intelligence to silence people, censor individuals. So yeah, it is just beginning, I believe. So it is going to be a rough thing to fight against, but we'll see. Once the algorithms are set, it's very difficult to fight back against that. Many of you experienced that throughout COVID and the years after, in relation to things like vaccines or the shot or other issues that you didn't agree with, lockdowns and, Hunter Biden's laptop. You're censored. All right. Speaking of this effect on the media and all this censoring and disinformation they have spewed over the past several years, CNN is now watching its prime time viewership dwindle to historic lows. Since just this recent election, 2024 election, the network has lost nearly half its audience. They're averaging just 394,000 viewers in prime time, a national network, 394,000 viewers. They used to get 1.8 million in prime time during the 2020 election cycle. Remember that when people were still buying into it? A number of people were. They saw over the last 4 years that, CNN has not been telling the truth about Joe Biden and Kamala Harris and the Democratic Party. And this recent drop is even more alarming when compared to, more conservative Fox News, which has maintained a fiercely loyal audience by doing what? By doubling down on its commitment to free market ideals. Remember, power's in the hands of the people. Accountability in government. So going after the real people who are skewing transparency and accountability, trying to cover up crimes and all that. And a focus on cultural issues that actually Americans care about, that really resonate with middle America. Not, you call it flyover country, but those people in flyover country, they also have moved to California and other places around the country. And they still have that mentality of traditional values that actually do matter to most Americans. And CNN, MSNBC, those types have kind of ignored that, as if everybody just wants, as Dana Nessel once said. Dana Nessel is the Attorney General of Michigan. She says that every school in Michigan needs to have a drag queen because drag queens make everything better, is Dana Nessel's view on what should be happening in public schools. So the media's softer coverage of President Biden has failed to win over the right, and I would say even the moderates. And meantime, viewers are they're abandoning cable altogether, by the way. They're favoring digital platforms, which offer unfiltered commentary and community engagement. People want stuff to be unfiltered, uncensored, so long as it's not profane, which is what we're going to try to not do here. But it's uncensored, unfiltered, with the name of getting to the truth. So under new leadership, CNN is shifting towards digital subscriptions right now. So $3.99 per month is what they're going to charge. There's a lot of competition out there, pretty stiff. Platforms like Substack and YouTube, where independent voices are thriving on those platforms right now. The question remains, can CNN reclaim its place as a trusted news leader? What do you think? I'd like to hear from you in the comments. Or has it lost the narrative battle for good? Because remember, they tried to shift after Joe Biden won last time around. They tried to say, we're going to be more down the middle. And there was a revolt within the CNN newsroom. All these radical left reporters and producers and executive producers and writers and all them and editors, they pushed back and said, no, we got to double down on the way we were by silencing people and keeping information that might hurt Joe Biden. We got to continue to censor that stuff and call it disinformation, Russian propaganda, even though we know it's not. We still need to do that. So they went back to that again, and now their audience has dwindled. MSNBC is faring pretty horribly as well, for pretty much the same reasons. All right, so let's talk about what's happening in California and Oregon right now. Under President-elect Donald Trump, the plans for a sweeping immigration crackdown and securing the border, and under the leadership of the incoming border czar, Tom Homan, California and Oregon are ramping up efforts to protect illegal immigrants within their borders from being deported. Gavin Newsom just outlined a plan that he has to protect illegal immigrants, to hide them from federal agents. Both states, California and Oregon, led by these Democratic officials, are crafting these strategies to counter what is likely to be mass deportations, starting with the most dangerous of them, by the way, the criminals and murderers and rapists, and start with them and then go from there. And so this whole effort is spotlighting a deepening divide between state and federal approaches to immigration enforcement. So in California, Governor Gavin Newsom's administration, they are considering this proposal is called the Immigration or the Immigrant Support Network concept. And there was a draft that was leaked a while back that I think Politico had uncovered, but it's ramping up, and they want to connect illegal immigrants with aid, taxpayer dollars, give them, schooling, give them resources, funding and healthcare, licenses, jobs, and then put them so deep in the system that the feds can't find them. And, this is while California right now has a $68 billion budget deficit, and they're going to double down on this kind of stuff. Is this financially viable to do this, these kinds of programs? No, it's not, obviously. And then you got lawmakers like the budget chair, his name is Scott Wiener in the Senate. He's a Senate budget chair, pushing for an additional 60 million, to expand illegal immigrant legal defense programs, give them attorneys to fight against the U.S. government. And Gavin Newsom's got this history of, pro illegal immigrant policies. He's got the $25 million legal defense fund that he put up during Donald Trump's first administration. He's ready to do it again to defy the federal deportation plans. And he means it because he's done it before. Meantime, in Oregon, the nation's first sanctuary state, going way back, is also doubling down. The Attorney General in Oregon, Ellen Rosenblum, recently launched a bilingual sanctuary promise community toolkit. It's a toolkit for illegal immigrants to educate residents on their rights under the state's sanctuary laws, which were first enacted back in 1987. I took a trip there to Portland, Oregon. I believe it was 87 or 88. That was a long time ago, and that's how long they've been this radical in the state of Oregon. So the toolkit that they've developed there includes practical resources, frequently asked questions like, how do I skirt the law? They'll give you answers to that. I don't know if that's exactly how it's phrased. I might be paraphrasing that one. And there's a hotline to report, federal immigration enforcement activity in your area. Federal laws still matter, I guess, especially when it comes to border security. They're the ones in charge of that. So anyway, and listen, I do have a soft place in my heart for the plight of immigrants coming to this country because we know it is difficult. And I've had friends who lived in Honduras and around the world in different places, and I understand the plight that they're in. But the fact of the matter, there's also a reason why they're in such difficult circumstances because of the violence of the gang activity and the drug cartels. They're coming over as well. So it's a national security issue. And if you just open up the floodgates, everybody comes over and you don't know who they are. And that's why there are laws in the books. It's not perfect to know the immigration system, but right now that's the way you do it. First, you got to secure the border instead of opening it up and allowing anyone and anybody to come over because it is a national security threat. So this person in Oregon, Rosenblum, emphasized the importance of proactive planning, urging residents to know your rights and make a plan. Again, they're telling illegal immigrants to know your U.S. given rights. It's really state rights. Make a plan. Call us if the feds show up at your door. Tom Homan, he was previously served as the ICE director. He has vowed a no-tolerance approach to illegal immigration, and his appointment by Trump shows that Trump is determined to fulfill the campaign promises of border security and deportation enforcement. And these state-level responses, they set the stage for a pretty fierce legal and political battle over these immigration policies because Tom Homan says these sanctuary cities, they will be held criminally, if not civilly, accountable for what they're doing there. All right, I want to show you this. This is very disturbing over the holiday weekend, a plane crash. Did you see this? I watched the first thing I saw regarding this was a video from a passenger on that plane that apparently he had made to his wife. I had not yet heard about the plane crash because it was a holiday and we were doing stuff with the family and church and whatnot. But I watched the video and I thought, oh, this is horribly sad. I couldn't understand the language because he was, I think, from Kazakhstan or some of these other, Azerbaijan may have been where he was from. I don't remember exactly, but that's where it crashed, by the way. It was Azerbaijan Airlines flight J28243. Actually, it did crash in Kazakhstan is where it was. Baku is the name of the town. That's where it departed from, Baku, and then it crashed in Kazakhstan. But it was heading apparently to Russia. And anyway, so there's a lot of theories about what happened there, but that's the flight. I saw the crash after I watched the poor man's video. There, it was very sad. And there's the end result. Several people did survive that. 29, I believe, are injured. 38 people dead on that flight. Fiery crash near the town that it crashed is Aktayu. I'm sure I mispronounced it. Aktayu, Kazakhstan. The jet, who was carrying a total of 62 passengers or 5 crew, both pilots were killed in this, but it veered hundreds of miles off course before it plummeted there to the other side of the Caspian Sea is where it crashed. But there's officials now pointing the fingers at Russia. Why Russia? Well, and it's already adding a lot of fuel to this, volatile geopolitical climate, fuel to the fire, so to speak. The reason why is because the crash occurred just after a bunch of drone strikes were targeting southern Russia. And that's an area where there were a lot of airport closures there because of this. They're calling it UAV. We used to call them UFOs, unidentified aerial vehicles. Is that what the UAV stands for, I think? Anyway, a lot of activity, drones. They've been very, very frequent, and Ukrainian and Azerbaijan authorities are suspecting that Russian interference in the disaster is what led to this plane crash. And some are even speculating that the drone strikes may have disrupted the airspace systems to such a degree that it indirectly caused the flight to deviate so far off course. Russia, of course, is denying all of this. They're denying involvement, of course. They've got an aviation watchdog there suggesting it was a bird strike as a possible cause that caused the damage to the plane, which ultimately caused it to crash. Critics are dismissing that explanation from Russia as kind of a convenient deflection on what really happened there. But as you can see, the video footage here, it just captures that plane's horrifying descent and the explosion upon impact. A lot of stunned survivors, they were emerging from the wreckage, visibly injured from that, coming out of the wreckage. It was amazing that people survived this. But among the 42 Azerbaijani citizens, alongside some nationals from Russia, Kazakhstan, and Kyrgyzstan, Azerbaijani President Ilham Aliyev declared that December 26th is going to be a national day of mourning, and he canceled his diplomatic trip to Russia. So they are very much in mourning there, and it's a lot of scrutiny going on here. The Russian aviation safety, policies and procedures. The broader role from Russia is being questioned in terms of its destabilization of that entire region. So whatever happened there, we don't know for sure, but of course there's a lot of people who say it is because of the drones. All right, I want to get to this. Dr. Cade is back with us today. We interviewed him a bit ago about, we're going to play that interview today, about knee replacements, and they can, they can bring a lot of relief to many. I consider it a knee replacement, but for some people, not a replacement, but surgery on my knee. But for some people, knee replacements, that the pain is persisting in their knee, and whether it's due to mechanical issues of the replacement they had, or maybe it's age, maybe infections can affect your knee replacements that you've gotten in times past. Maybe there's nerve problems that need to be fixed. There's a lot of options that they can provide. There's physical therapy. There's regenerative medicine to cutting-edge surgical techniques as well. Getting to the root cause of the pain is important. So I talked to Dr. Cade, and here's that conversation just a few days ago. Dr. Matthew Cade is back with us with Advanced Orthopedic Specialist. It's good to see you, Doctor.
Hey, Tom. How are you?
Fantastic. Unfortunately, for a lot of people, they're not feeling so fantastic. And you deal with a lot of knee replacements, hip replacements. Let's talk about knee replacements specifically and some of the things that might go wrong in time with knee replacements, and how do you fix something that, and of course, pain is often an indicator that something is wrong.
Yeah. Sometimes people, they have chronic pain after their knee is replaced. It's a small percentage, but roughly 5% of people still have aches and pains or issues or complications. And some of the more common ones that we see would be like if the knee gets infected, okay? If the knee gets loose, meaning where the metal component is attached to your bone, if that gets loose, that can cause a lot of pain. And then eventually, sometimes they just wear out after 25, 30 years.
Right. Okay. Well, let's talk about each one of those things. So we talk about the infection. How might that happen, and how do you fix it?
Yeah. The most common way that a prosthetic joint gets infected is what we call hematogenous spread. Basically, there's a small amount of bacteria in your blood. It gets to the knee, it seeds itself, and it creates an infection. So maybe you had a pneumonia or an infection elsewhere, and that little bit of bacteria works its way into your knee.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you can go in there and then fix the issue. You can replace it or whatever
Yeah.
needs to happen.
If it's caught early enough, we can go in, change the plastic piece, and wash it all out, and we're all set. If it's a chronic thing that's been in there, if it can form a layer on the metal, we can't get rid of it. We have to take the metal out and redo everything. Yeah.
Okay. All right. But of course, they've got to come and see you first to
Yeah.
find out what the situation is. All right. Talk about the knee replacement loosening up. How does that happen, and how do you fix that?
Yeah. So typically, knee replacements are either press fit in with like a porous coating on the metal, okay, that your bone grows into, or we cement it in place, okay. Either way, it can get loose over time, and micro motion just creates a little bit of stress at that level, and then it gets loose and it causes pain. So,
Wow. Okay.
typically that won't happen till later on down the road, but sometimes 5, 10, 15 years, they get loose, and then we go in and change them out, put in bigger components with stems, and then those stems get cemented in, and then those never get loose.
Okay.
Knock on wood.
Yeah, knock on wood or knock on plastic, whatever
Yeah.
the piece is made out of. So let's talk about, eventually things just need to be replaced. If you had a knee replacement when you're 55 years old and suddenly you're 85, maybe 90 years old, that might be a time. What happens to cause the need for one of these to be replaced?
In between the two metal parts is a plastic insert, and it's a very fancy, well-engineered plastic piece. It's a polyethylene that is supposed to last a long time. So I tell people 25, 30 years, but sometimes sooner. But when that physically gets worn down, then the metal is going to be on top of the metal. So what we do is we go in, and if everything else looks perfect, sometimes you can just exchange the plastic piece. Other times you have to take it all out and start from scratch again. Yeah.
When you think about different types of pain, I mean, nerve pain, is that a common, source? Is something pressing upon a nerve, or is that something you run into at times when you're dealing with the nervous system?
Yeah, sometimes there's kind of this nebulous pain in someone's lower extremity. So we try to decipher, is it sciatica, like a radiating pain from the nerves higher up? Is it just a local nerve inflammation by the knee? And that's something that some of the PM&R doctors can help with, physical medicine and rehab. Sometimes they can freeze the nerve or deaden it so it's not so painful. But that's not as common as the other stuff we were talking about.
Okay. And one final question. I'm just curious because, some of these people will come in and say, listen, I got my knee replaced 30 years ago. I think it's time. And you agree with them because of whatever the symptoms they're exhibiting, maybe it's pain or whatever it is. But can you describe the difference that they will experience from 30 years ago to today in terms of the technology and the procedures and what we've learned over the past few decades?
Oh, yeah. I mean, 30 years ago, that polyethylene plastic piece was a lot different. So if you got 30 years out of it, that was like a miracle. So that's impressive that they lasted that long to begin with. And then we just have different ways to approach the replacement, and we have the metal parts last a lot longer now too.
Yeah.
So overall, it would just be a better experience and a better, well-balanced knee than 30 years ago.
Okay, well, more of a pleasurable experience than it was back in 1970, whatever the time frame was. That was more than 30 years ago. That was 50, I think. But I'd always appreciate it. It's very intriguing. Dr. Matthew Cade, Advanced Orthopedic Specialist. Thank you.
Yep,
Appreciate
thanks,
it.
Tom.
Yeah, always good to have Dr. Cade with us. We'll be back with again in January after the new year. I want to take a couple of your comments for people chiming in today. Love to hear from you, or maybe it's a question. I don't know. I'm going to see them for the very first time as Cameron Harris pops them up on the screen here. Let's start off with the first one. It is from Harry Sakalian. Good morning, Tom. Good morning, Harry. Good to see you again. Hope you and yours are having a merry 2024 Christmas season. We are. Thanks, Harry. And I hope yours are as well, and your entire family and your friends as well. It defies logic that limiting personal opinions will somehow lead to finding the truth. Zeesh. Regards, Harry Sakalian. Zeesh. I might even say Zoiks. You're right, Harry. It doesn't make sense because it isn't true. Okay, so you get in a room with five people with five different opinions, and only one of them is allowed to succeed in being shared with the rest of the group. That's well, it's oppression, really. I mean, you're suppressing speech, and that's an oppressive tactic in order to stay in control. And if you can go through all sorts of dictatorships and see how they actively did that, people were killed. And that's how you ultimately silence somebody is you kill them if you don't like what they're saying. But up until then, there's many steps to silencing individuals. That's, you can fire them from their jobs, or you can kick them off of YouTube or off of Facebook or TikTok if you don't like what they're saying. You can do what Bill Gates wants to do now. He wants to use artificial intelligence to censor everybody who disagrees with his perspective on a shot. Those kinds of things. Those are things that lead up. But if people will not be quiet, ultimately what happens? They end up putting them to death. I mean, we look at that. I mean, you can go back 2,000 years ago to the death of Jesus Christ, which, by the way, was God's will. His Father's will was that he would die on the cross in order to be sacrificed for the sin of all humanity, and then he rose him again from the dead. But the intention of those who didn't like his message was to keep him quiet. And you see throughout the narratives of the various gospel and historical accounts that, he and those in power, the people in power, did not like what he was saying. So they kept threatening him. They kept trying to defame him publicly, calling him names and completely mischaracterizing who he was and what he was doing. And they lied about him a lot and got to the point where he just wouldn't keep quiet. So they colluded with one another. They found a way to deceive the public, to convince them that he also was a danger to them, which he wasn't, obviously. And then they killed him. But of course, it backfired because all of this was under the authority of God and he was watching it. But it's just another example of how disinformation, real disinformation, is used to silence people. And it's the whole straw man approach in an argument to build the straw man, this mischaracterization of somebody so you can tear that person down. That's what they tried to do with Jesus, but Jesus was doing it for your benefit. So anyway, Harry, Merry Christmas. Thank you for that. Let's bring up another comment here. Another question or whatever it is. Taz is back. Hi, Taz. How are you? When will Michigan rescind our state governor and lawmakers from being exempt from FOIA? Boy, that is the elephant in the room. That's the $64 million question. It might be billion, I think, with inflation. But that question has been asked time and again for many years. And you've got, politicians from both sides of the aisle saying this is a priority. We want to allow FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, to be implemented against those. The whole purpose why it's there is that for transparency, primarily from government officials. But somehow in the state of Michigan, is one of two states. It might be the only one left. I know Idaho was the other one, but I think they're trying to be more transparent in the state of Idaho. So it's either one of two or the only one, Michigan is, to not allow the Freedom of Information Act to apply to the governor or to the state legislature. Members of the state legislature, they are not. You can't FOIA them to find out what's in their emails, what's in their public documents. And now they've even expanded it to public school teachers. You can't FOIA them to find out what's going on in their communication with staff and what are they teaching and those types of things. So I don't know. It seems to me like it's not getting better. There was this kind of a ruse in Proposal 1 in the 2022 midterms. That was a constitutional amendment that people were told would mandate that the legislatures and the state government had to be transparent about where they were getting their incomes from, but it wasn't. It was actually just a sliver. Okay, you have to write down where you've worked, I think, before. But it doesn't do anything in terms of all the backroom deals, in terms of what lobbyists are providing as gifts. In fact, they're trying to expand that even more and keep you and me from knowing about it. So that's a good question, Taz. I wish I had the answer. I don't, but I certainly hope that there are enough people who are willing now to be intellectually honest and say, hey, we've all, as parties, have been lying to the people. I, for one, in my party, are going to stand up and say we've got to we got to put in laws and then enforce these laws regarding transparency in the state of Michigan. Both the legislature and the governor's office need to be under the laws of the Freedom of Information Act, and also public teachers as well. Anyway, great questions. Thanks for your time today. Appreciate it. We got another great show tomorrow on your Friday, 9 a.m. Eastern, right here, Tom Jordan Live. Remember, you can catch us on Facebook, on X, on YouTube, on Spotify, and on Apple Podcast. Until tomorrow, have a great one. God bless you. We'll see you then.